Hello, and welcome to another episode of Let's Argue About Plants, the podcast for people who love plants.
Just not always the same ones.
I'm Steve Aiken. I'm the guy with the glasses.
I'm Danielle Sherry. I'm the girl with a lot of hair. And today,
Was that a dig? Was that a dig? That's not cool.
Well, no, you're not a girl. I mean, I didn't say I'm the one with a lot of hair. I said I'm the girl with a lot of hair. So, yeah. Boy, we're starting off really well. Yeah. Well, all right, we're going to keep rolling too with unhappiness on Steve's part, because if ever there was a topic that Steve resisted doing more, that I
for so many reasons.
Okay, all right. So today, loyal listeners, our topic is memory plants. Now, for those of you who need a definition, which we all do, and so did Steve, for me to convince him, memory plants are plants that were passed down through your family. Or you got a division from a friend long ago. Or it's a plant that you think about your kids all the time when you see it, because they used to kick a soccer ball into it constantly and trample it. Or you went on an amazing trip to the Southwest and you smuggled this little agave suckling back on the plane with TSA looking at you strangely the entire time. These are memory plants that when you look at them in your garden, you think of a memory that's associated with that plant. Now, Steve will tell you why it's the worst topic that we have ever done.
Well, first, I have a terrible memory. Like, everybody who knows me and works with me knows I have a terrible memory. Like, I don't remember things. I'm always impressed by people who can say, like, oh, yeah, I think that happened back in 93. Look, I don't remember one year from the next. Like what's the difference between 93 and 94? I have no idea, I'll remember 2020. Obviously, and 2021. But other than that, like I won't remember, 2018 from 2017. It's always shocking to me, like, oh, you did that article 10 years ago. I'm like, what? That seems like yesterday. So I have a terrible memory, A, and B, I'm not that sentimental. So like, I don't get attached to things.
Never were truer words spoken.
Well, my wife is attached to like pretty much everything in our house. So like, if you accidentally break a plate, she's like, you've killed a member of her family or something like that. It's
well,
awful.
Are they her grandmother's china? I mean,
no, they're plates we got like from Kmart, like back when we were first like living together. It's
I don't
nothing.
think that's accurate. I do not. I know your wife. I don't think that's accurate.
Oh, but it is. You can even ask my kids who like, don't drop the bull. You know how mom's going to act. All sorts of things she's just absolutely attached to. So I have no memory. I'm not that sentimental, and pretty much every plant that someone has given me is probably dead by now. So I'm just, it's just not that, yeah. Anyway, I was able to come up with some stuff, and I do have some thoughts about some plants.
Okay.
And whether or not these are interesting memories, I have no idea, but they will be the memories that I talk about.
Well, I think that, this also stemmed from the idea of, I always love when we visit, one of the perks of our jobs, and sometimes not so perks of our jobs, is we get to travel around the country and we're invited into the gardens, which is, a personal creation of so many different people. And I don't think that there's ever a garden that I visited that I'm walking around with the garden owner and creator where they don't point out something of, oh yeah, I got that from so-and-so, or, oh, you like that tree? It was a seedling off of, this neighbor guy down the street. There's always a story. And I always find those stories fascinating. I think it's really interesting to hear those when we're visiting these gardens. And for Steve, it's the worst part of the job.
Well, no. I love those stories as well. But you have toured my garden. Did you get any of those stories? You did not.
No, I did. I did, and I'm not going to steal your thunder because I noticed that the plant is on your list, and I'm so excited for you to talk about it too. I'm not gonna force you into talking about that one first, but
I probably have a different memory. Like, oh, that's not what I thought you were going to say.
No, it warmed my heart to see it on your. Yeah, no. So that's a bunch of crap, and no. All right. So let's start off with Steve giving us your first memory plant.
I feel like there should be like some music here, like do, you know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Soap opera music.
We have to. I should set the stage that like I live in the house that I grew up in. I was born in 1969. My parents moved to this property. It's a 1-acre property at Cheshire, Connecticut, in 1970. So I was barely existed by the time we got here. So it's this is the house that I grew up in, and it has 2 houses on it. So there's the main house, and then next door was a teeny tiny little house that my grandmother lived in when I was growing up. Long story short, little house is now a bigger house, and my parents moved over there, and I now live in what was the main house. So I live on the property that my mother was gardening in for all these years, and really. Memory plants for me. I remember her planting Pachysandra and Vinca minor, periwinkle, myrtle, whatever you call it, like everywhere, and like struggling so hard to get those plants established. And I do nothing but rip out Pachysandra and myrtle wherever I find it. And
this was so not the way this episode was supposed to go.
These are not the plants I'm recommending, but this is just some background. And so, my mother lives next door, and she wanders over when I'm ripping out this myrtle from the bank that she worked for years to get established. It's like, so you're doing that with the bank, huh? Oh, okay, yeah. Oh, I can remember your grandmother and I really, planting that myrtle and trying to get it going. I'm like, okay, yeah. Well, you should have picked a different plant, Mom. So that's how unsentimental I am. But that said, the first plants that I ever owned were bought for me by my parents. They first bought me a hosta. Was the first plant. They're like. They didn't buy it. It was my neighbors across the street were digging up some hostas. And I remember my mother coming to me saying, hey, Bob and Kathy are digging up some hostas. Do you want some? And there was this area behind, because I was living in the little house at that point. And I'm like, I guess so. I didn't even know what a hosta was. So, hostas, I chucked them in the ground. They grew, looked great. And I said, this is easy. So I swear the next plant they got me was a bleeding heart. And we all know bleeding heart, Lamprocapnos spectabilis, zones 3 to 9. Used to be Dicentra, but this species has changed to Lamprocapnos. And it's a shade perennial that sends out these undulating, horizontal stems from which dangle these heart-shaped blooms, like red. And it looks like the sounds gross, but it looks like the bottom of the heart has been opened up, and you can see the white, there's like petals inside that. And it's very striking, very unique flower, just truly, captivating. It's a quintessential garden plant. It's been around forever. To see it is to love it. And I still have that very plant. And I've been thinking a lot about bleeding hearts because as you know, Danielle, we're developing an article on bleeding hearts. And I still have that main bleeding heart that I grew from whenever. And it's the type of, don't touch the bleeding heart. Okay. Just watch out for it. That's like my rule. Like, don't touch the bleeding heart. And I have almost touched it because bleeding hearts go dormant in summer. Like by July, they're turning, yellow to white and basically giving up for the year, which I do too. And so by September, October, it's died back, and I sometimes forget that it's there. And I said, oh, there's a bare spot. I should put something in there. And I go to, shove something in there. And then I say, well, what are these roots? Oh, darn, it's the bleeding heart. But eventually I've got some stuff planted around there. I don't need to go messing about with it anymore. That's my memory of bleeding heart, as being sort of like the second plant that I ever owned. It's still there. it makes me happy every spring. Like it's hard not to be happy when you see those beautiful things. And I also remember sitting on the back porch with my daughter Violet when she was young, and she was blowing bubbles, and the bubbles all went over to the bleeding heart and just kind of like sat on the branches.
That
And
is so cool.
they sat there long enough for me to go and get the camera and take pictures of it. So
Oh,
there
that's so
is
awesome.
okay. So does that count as a memory plant?
Steve, you knocked it out the park. That is
Oh, okay.
perfect.
All
You
right.
did a good
I'm done
job.
I'm done for the day. Go ahead with your
I
plant.
mean, I mean, the heartstrings were pulling and I was welling up a
Yeah.
little bit. I mean, and it's a plant
Well,
that's like a
that,
heart, which makes your
that
heart sing. Oh my God. I mean,
I should probably add that I made all that up. I don't even grow this plant. I don't have a daughter. Um,
he's lying.
this
He's lying.
house was built in 2010. You know,
It's a prefab.
yeah.
Oh my God. No, that is perfect. Like I because I do feel like, listen, this podcast, we talk about plants, hardworking plants, plants that are for the back of the border, plants that bulk up quick, 4 season. But there's an aspect of gardening that is a lot about feeling, and speaking of article development, I know that we're developing a garden design article right now that's a lot about creating moments and the feelings that are evoked when you walk through a garden. And I think these memory plants, for lack of a better term, create feelings,
And you probably picked the wrong editor to develop that article, but so be it. You're stuck with him.
No, but now I know you have it in you. Yeah. Well, so I feel like so many of the memory plants that are in my garden, and it sounds like yours too, have been, gifted to you from others, from family members. And I think I actually only chose one of those that's on my list. And please don't write me in letters about this plant because I know people have strong opinions about it. But lily of the valley. But I'm going to pick pink lily of the valley, which is Convallaria majalis variety rosea. It's zones 2 to 7. But this pink lily of the valley was in my grandmother's garden. And this is a grandmother who actually passed away when I was fairly young. And my dad and stepmother, who were just getting into gardening at that time, had rescued some plants from her garden and transplanted them into their own. And so when I moved into this house about a decade ago, that was one of the first things that they brought when they came to see the new house. Was they brought a couple of chunks in shopping bags, plastic Stop and Shop shopping bags of this pink lily of the valley. And, doing what I do, I was like, oh, that's kind of basic. But then they told me, oh, it's from Mammy's garden, which is what we call my grandmother. And I thought, oh, all right. Well, now I gotta plant it. Like it's from my dead grandmother. But so I did. So I planted it. And I will say that the pink lily of the valley is not as aggressive a spreader. It's actually kind of disappointed me because the place that I put it was in a shady kind of strip behind my deck that I kind of just wanted it to fill in as a ground cover. And it has very slowly, in 10 years, spread to be about 3 feet by a foot and a half or so. So it is spread extremely slowly. Now that I've heard that that's because pink lily of the valley spreads slower. I've also got it in extremely lean soil. So that's probably inhibiting its growth as well. But I gotta say, for a plant that I was like, oh, gee, thanks, lily of the valley. Every time, and it's about to happen now, every time that those green blades emerge in spring and it shoots up that adorable stem with the little pink bells on it that smells delicious, it just warms my heart. I think of my grandmother, and I honestly, what I think about is that my grandmother used to have this makeup table. You know, she was a woman of a certain age that had this makeup table that was filled with all these perfumes and powders that smelled all different colors. So in my head, I've put the two together, and all of her perfumes and powders smelled like Lily of the Valley. So I honestly smell that, and I think, oh, Mammy's makeup table. But Pink Lily of the Valley, it's just it's a really solid ground cover in the right situation. And I think also if you get the pink version, not the standard white, it is a bit better behaved. So yeah, that's my memory.
Yeah, well, that reminds me of a memory I have of a plant that I grow because of my grandmother. My grandmother used to have English ivy in her yard, and I wanted some to like cover over these stone parts of these stone pillar things that we had. So she let me have some of her English ivy, and I planted it. And about 5 years later, I regretted it because English ivy just gets everywhere, and you can't get rid of it. And it's like, ugh. And but I felt like, well, I kind of had to keep it because it's my grandmother's ivy. And then it wasn't too long. It was maybe like 2-3 years ago. My mother, was walking over. She's like, "Ugh, you're still growing that ivy?" And I'm like, "That's grandma's ivy." She's like, "Oh, she hated that stuff." And I'm like, "Well, I could have been." She's good. And by now it's got such a foothold into where it is, I can't get rid of it. And I'm like,
oh
well,
my gosh.
The things we do, to honor our ancestors, where our ancestors would be like, why are you doing that? That's ridiculous.
Right? That's so funny. I know. Perhaps my mammy would have been like, that was my least favorite plant in the whole garden. Yeah. But yet still, I still have it and I still love it. All right, so, I'm waiting to see if this next one is the one that I've been waiting for.
No, it's not. Because the memory I have, I walked around to see like, well, what plants do you have memories of? And when I look at this plant, I'm remembered of one of the few times I was actually smart about something in the garden, and it's my Oyama magnolia. It's Magnolia cyboldii, zone 6 to 8, and this is a multi-stem tree. Gets to be about 15 feet high and wide, partial shade. I guess I could take full sun. I have it in partial shade. I think it's naturally an understory plant. And in late spring, early summer, you get these white flowers that are about 3 to 4 inches wide. And, they hang downward, which is great because they're looking at you. So you can look up into the inside of them. If you look at the inside, they have like this red ring of flower parts. I don't know whether they're the petals, the whatever they are, but it's whatever it is. It's the red ring in there. It's a very cool looking flower, and they're slightly fragrant. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful tree that's grown up wonderfully. And it's again, when I first started buying plants, when I thought that I knew what I was doing, I bought this plant, and it was just this teeny tiny little thing that I got from a mail order nursery and paid way too much for it. And I said, that'll never grow into anything. And that's usually the reasons why I don't buy things like dwarf conifers. Because I'm like, oh, it's just going to take forever. But forever has to start sometime. And so I was smart enough to buy something that could grow into something, way back when. And I did that. And I actually planted it in the right place too. It's on the corner of a deck that I have towards the back, and it really anchors that end of the bed, and it looks great. It's growing great there. It's super happy. It looks awesome, and I, every time I look at it, I'm like, oh yeah, I was smart about that one, And then I look at the rest of the garden, and that feeling goes away. But my Magnolia cyboldii makes me feel smart on occasion.
Now, I have a question. It's planted in a very particular spot in your yard, and it looks beautiful in that spot. And there is a deck, as you mentioned. Didn't something significant happen on that deck?
Yeah, that's where I got married, but that has nothing to do with the story. It has nothing to do with anything. It's not related to anything. It also used to be a swimming pool. Does that count too? Where I spent many a day in my youth splashing,
I think subconsciously you remembered that, oh, I got married here, and that's why you planted that beautiful tree in that spot. I think that's what I'm.
I think I planted it there before we got married.
Oh, even better. Oh, see, that was the story that I remembered from walking around your yard. So that's why I knew that you had told me. I had thought that the tree was there before you got married, but maybe that I stand corrected if it wasn't. But I recall you saying that it was there. However, it wasn't in bloom when you got married. I think I have a good memory.
I don't connect that tree with our marriage at all. Although that's one of the other instances in my life where I've been smart. I chose the right woman. So
yes, see, there you go. All right.
Don't tell her I said that.
I'm going to. All right. So I'm going to bring it up to a plant that has less heartstrings, but just makes me happy when I see it. And it was a plant that was collected on a fine gardening trip. So, a big bummer of going and visiting these gardens is gardeners have this thing where they see that you are liking a plant and they go, oh, let me dig you out a clump of that. Well, when you're in Arizona and you got to get back to Connecticut, that isn't so easy to do. However, we've all done it. So this is a plant that happened to me in Tennessee, and I was in the garden of Robin Brown. And I believe that I included this plant on our shade webinar not so long ago, but it is Mexican speckled tinantia. It's Tinantia pringlei, zone 6 to 10. Some places say 7 to 9. But this is a really cool little plant. It's in the spiderwort family. It has these cool green leaves that are splashed with purple. Beautiful, clear amethyst purple flowers. Generally starting in late spring, goes all the way through summer, all the way through fall. Huge bloom time. Pollinators go bananas over it. About a foot tall, about a foot wide, billowy habit, perfect for on the edges of the garden. So I see this in her garden, and for her, it was in shade. And she goes, oh no, that thing will go in sun, it'll go in shade, it goes everywhere. So I'm thinking, this is a great knitter plant. How many plants can you put in all those different conditions and make your landscape kind of look cohesive? Not that many. So she goes, let me scoop you out a bunch of this. And she throws it in a plastic shopping bag. I don't even think it was a pot, which was good because then that meant that I could layer it in my suitcase between, my fine gardening shirts and, dirty laundry and sneak it through onto the plane. And lo and behold, get back to Connecticut. And what do? I put the suitcase in the corner. I'm exhausted from traveling. And it had to be 3 or 4 days before I remembered to unpack my suitcase, which is normal for me. And that thing looked like it had been through a war. I mean, it literally looked like it had been shrink wrapped, mashed to a pulp. And I thought, well, chuck it in. And that was 7 or 8 years ago. And I still have, it has reseeded itself. It does self-sow. It is not root hardy for me at my garden. This is Mexican speckled tinantia. But it comes back serendipitously, not obnoxiously, all around my garden, in sun, in shade, all over the place. I'll put up some photos from my garden of where it is. But I love this plant so much. I think of robin. I never remember the common name because there's 18 million different common names for it. But what I call it is the Grand Old Opry plant because Robin's husband was a country musician, And so on that same trip, she took me to the Grand Old Opry and I got to see backstage, which is actually under the stage at the Grand Old Opry. So I just call it the Grand Old Opry plant. And I think about that experience and that trip and that whole thing every time I see this really, really awesome plant. And every time we speak, which isn't all that often, I always say thank you for that plant, the Grand Old Opry plant, otherwise known as Mexican speckled tinantia.
Yeah, I have a couple of plants that actually survived the trip home. There are many more plants that did not.
Yes,
but it's usually I'm carrying it in my hand, on the plane and stuff like that. And because, I'm not that comfortable talking to strangers, whenever somebody kind of looks at it and they kind of like open their mouth to say something, I just say, don't ask. And like, oh, got it, understand. I imply there's some sort of weird story to it, other than like, I'm just bringing this home because it's
I
a
like
plant.
it.
It's a plant, and I need every plant that there is. But yeah, I love getting plants, but getting them home is the hard part.
It's very true.
So you touched on a bit of how plants kind of get their common names. Like you call it the grand old Opry plant, and I remember my mother having a plant she called dandelion shrub. It's Caria japonica, but the flowers are like dandelion, so she called it dandelion shrub. This is how plants get their common names and why they have so many different ones. I have a plant that I have given a new common name. I call them blueberries. They are not blueberries; they're grape hyacinths. So there's little 6-inch bulb, that sends up a little cone of little blue, bell-shaped flowers. And they're wonderful and delightful in spring. Like I said, about 6 inches tall. How wide? I have no idea because I always plant them in like hordes of 10 or 15 or 20. They reseed around, but I just recall when my son was little, he walked by a patch of those out by our back porch, and he said, "Oh, look, blueberries!" And so I now call them every time I see them. I say, "Oh, look, blueberries."
Don't eat them. Don't eat them. Don't eat them.
Right. Don't eat them. But then we also have a great picture of him as a little boy, like holding a watering can, basically upside down over the blueberries, the grape hyacinths. That he had just watered, and the look, the giant smile on his face of someone who's so proud of what he just did, a smile that only like a 3-year-old boy can have. And we have that picture. I see it every time I walk up the stairs. So grape hyacinths, Muscari armoniacum, zones 4 to 8, one of the easiest bulbs to grow, and that you can never have too many of. Is for me a memory plant because it reminds me of Evan back in the days when he smiled.
We should say now, Evan is he's a preteen now. This was a while ago.
Evan will be 13 in about 2 weeks, and
wow.
Evan is as tall as I am.
Wow! So yeah, how time flies. Yet the Muscari hasn't changed much in that time, I'm sure.
No, so it seems to pop up everywhere. I see it in the lawn now, like not to a nuisance place, but I was cutting the grass and I saw one popped up there. There's one in the in between the steps of our walkway, So they pop up in different places, but never to a point of like, oh my God, it's invasive. I got to get rid of it. It's just like, here I am,
Serendipitous plant. I like it. My next one is an aster. It's I'm going to murder this. I just had it in my head and now I'm going to murder it. Tatarian aster. Tataricus jindai. Help me out, Steve.
Tataricus, I believe.
Tataricus. Okay. Yeah. Tataricus. So Tatarian aster, which sounds like it was a character from Star Trek The Next Generation. This is not your normal aster. This is zones 4 to 8. The foliage looks like romaine lettuce. I mean, I think that's the perfect description of it. It's large, it's spade-like, it's very corrugated and rough. Don't eat it. It's not edible. But this is an aster that's a big boy, gets 3 to 6 feet tall and wide. In my garden, it tops out at about maybe 4.5 feet, maybe 5 feet when it shoots up its blooms. Blooms late fall, kind of after all other even fall blooming asters. But this was something that I feel like when you are a gardener and you buy a new house or you move to a new place, all your friends who are gardeners say, all right, you're establishing yourself again. Come on over to my garden. Let me dig some stuff out for you. And this was my friend Jen. This is what she wanted to do. She's like, hey, your housewarming present is going to be come to my garden in spring. I'll cleave off a bunch of divisions for you. Take them home. Now, some were better than others.
What a cheapskate. She got out of giving you a present. Yeah, come clean it. You can have all the food in the back of my refrigerator. Just help yourself.
To me, I actually thought it was one of the best gifts ever. I got
Right.
hellebores. I got epimediums. I mean, I got so much cool stuff. But I also got this aster. And as she's digging it out, she gave it a warning. She said, put this in a place that you don't care if it takes over. So that's what I did. And I used this plant and shoved it underneath basically a stand of oak leaf hydrangeas. So for most of the year, all it looks like is kind of a matted ground cover of romaine lettuce. And then as the oak leaf hydrangeas are starting to color up and get, kind of that burgundy color, they're about 8 feet tall. This aster shoots up these fireworks from that romaine lettuce, these large stable stems of purple, daisy-like with a yellow center flowers all over it. And it's so late in the season. I say, I don't think anything else is truly blooming in my garden at that point. I've got a lot of fall color from plants, but definitely not blooming by late October. And it's tough as nails. It is tough as nails. It is in a really terrible spot. It obviously has a ton of root competition because of those oak leaf hydrangeas. It's lean soil as is. It's full baking sun in one corner, and then it kind of goes into partial shade. But yeah, it's a winter plant. I can see it being a bit aggressive for folks if they are thinking, oh, this is going to be great to introduce into the border and it'll play nice with its neighbors. No, it needs a sturdy shrub, I would say, or beefy neighbor that's going to fight back against its pernicious ways. But yeah, it's a great plant, and thanks, Jen. I love it. I thought it was a great housewarming present. So,
but you can see there's a reason why gardeners are so eager to give away plants. It's that we can't kill them, but like, oh my God, there are. Oh, I have so many of these things. And so when somebody comes over, they're like, here, take 5 of these. Here, take 10.
Yeah.
It's like with zucchini. You like,
yeah.
oh, you like zucchini? Here, have 3 bags full.
Yeah.
And I've developed a new rule about gardening. If you want to make a friend, grow tomatoes. If you want to test a friendship, grow zucchini.
Oh, I like it. They should make that into a T-shirt. Yeah. That is so true.
Yeah, because you'll find out just how good of a friend they are by how much zucchini you can give them. And everybody's your friend because they want a tomato. But yeah, gardeners are eager to give away things. Because we can't kill them,
no.
But we don't need them. It's like with succulents with me, like they send out so many pups, and so many offsets that like you have to pot them up. But now I have 12 of the same succulent that I'm not that excited about to begin with. So like, and succulents are popular now. So it's great when my daughter's friends come over. And like, oh, how cute! I'm like, oh, would you like one? They're like, oh yeah, here, take another one. Take one for your parents. Yeah, like, oh, great, really? You sure it's okay? Like, yeah, oh yeah, take them all. Go ahead. So probably my earliest plant memory is of my mother standing on the front porch, shouting, "Watch out for my Japanese maple!" Because my brothers and I, and usually, some of the boys from the neighborhood would play, football, or more accurately, a game we would call "Kill the Guy with the Ball," in our front yard, which is right near where my mother had planted this little sapling of a Japanese maple. And so, yeah, she would come out and we were so deathly afraid of hurting the Japanese maple that we would rather get tackled on the concrete sidewalk just short of the Japanese maple than to actually come near this little tree,
mom's precious treasure.
Yeah, that was much better to get tackled on the concrete. So that's how I came to know what a Japanese maple is. And eventually she was smart enough to move it because, boys are going to be boys and they're going to keep playing football and kill the guy with the ball right around your tree. And boys aren't that smart. And we step on things and we roll on things and we tackle other people onto things. It just happens. So she was smart enough to move it, and she moved it to the end of the driveway where it stands to this day. It's actually in between our two houses.
Okay.
So that's my mom's Japanese maple. And send up seedlings, everywhere. They're growing around the place. So
Is it a
that's
weeping or an upright?
it's kind of it's neither. It's in between. It
Oh,
grows kind of up and out. I don't know the cultivar, but it's not blood good. So that's probably the biggest memory I have of a plant. And I have a more recent memory because of that, because it's at the end of the driveway and I park beneath the Japanese maple. And its leaves will fall onto my car. And when they blow off, like dirt has gotten around the edges. So you basically see the outline of the Japanese maple leaves. So my car is covered in all these outlines of Japanese maple leaves, which, I don't care. So my car's not the cleanest thing in the world. Who cares? But we went to a soccer tournament with one of my daughters, and I never thought twice about this. And I was walking back to the car, and I see this woman looking at me, looking at my car, and looking back at me. And I'm like, thinking to myself, what's your problem, lady? And then it was then that I realized the similarity of a Japanese maple leaf and a marijuana leaf. They look very similar. So my car is just covered in the outlines of what looks like marijuana leaves at this youth soccer tournament. And I'm very clearly a dad, and I didn't say anything. And so that's
how judgmental of her. How judgmental.
Well, I don't know. I don't know what
you were a
I don't know what
in a legalized state. How judgy. I don't like that.
I don't think I think she just looked kind of confused. So
like he chose this car to drive.
I didn't know if she was going to ask me for some or be like, "How dare you?" Like you don't know. Like, how dare you? Do you have any for me? Like you don't. I didn't know, but it was a memory. I was embarrassed. I'm like, no, I'm not purveying drugs around children. I park underneath a Japanese maple, and they happen to look awfully similar to marijuana.
I feel like a lot of people would have Japanese maple memories because I have a Japanese maple, not blood good, upright of some fashion in my yard, in my garden. That was a seedling from my dad who rescued it from a seedling from the house I grew up in. So I feel like everybody, like that is a common plant that people have memories surrounding. Most of them legal, some of them illegal. Well, I'm going to end on a tree too. And I feel like I feel like this story, but you're just going to have to sit there and pretend that you've heard it. You haven't heard it before, but
I've been pretending to listen to this entire thing. So yeah, I'm good at this. Yeah.
I mean, really, you've been pretending to listen during our entire working relationship of 15 years. So I'm used to it.
Of course I am.
So, all right, you remember Wissel's Saguaro cypress, the tree that looks like it has arms that are waving, or it's one of those blow up dolls at used car sales lots where they are kind of like wacky inflatable arm man.
Yeah, I always wished I could have a plant that looked like one of those.
No, I remember you seeing this. All right, so listen, it was featured in an article in Fine Gardening, and I believe the topic was tall, skinny trees, or trees with a small footprint. And we had an author that wrote about this: Wissel, Saguaro, Lawson's cypress, which is Cypress, Lawsonii, Wilson's Saguaro. Zones 5 to 7, not a huge zonal range on this, but it's a really interesting. It looks like it has arms. It looks like a saguaro cactus, but only in conifer form. And the needles of the conifer are very Cypress-like, where they're kind of a bluey, dark green color, scaly. It has a ton of texture. And listen, this thing gets to be about 10 feet to 12 feet tall and only 2 to 3 feet wide. How interesting. What a cool silhouette. And this author wrote about it, and I said, this thing's cool. I need one of these. Couldn't find it anywhere. The author happened to be from the West Coast, where this is actually native. It is native into that area. So I think Oregon into Northern California. And so when I was out there the next time, I happened to meet up with this author and say, hey, remember that tree a couple years later that you talked about, Wissel Saguaro? And she's like, oh, yeah. Where can I get it? And the nursery was an hour or so away. All right. So I'm driving to the nursery. I'm getting this plant. And it was in a little, and I had no idea how big this was going to be. This thing could have been a B&B. Then what was I going to do? That was a waste of an hour. But I drive up there and they had small 1-gallon trees that were, overall probably only about 2 feet tall. And I'm thinking, great. Somehow I'm going to get this home. So I did the Steve approach. I carried this thing. So it goes through the x-ray machine and, I'm telling him, be careful with Mr. Wissel. Take the tree back. Now the thing it has little arms and it looks like it's waving. I mean, and that's just what it looks like. So it was a very, I'm sure, peculiar sight. I get on the plane and to my recollection, one of the seats was free. This was many years ago. One of the seats was free, not because of COVID, but because it wasn't oversold. And there's a guy who sits on the aisle and I move to the window and I put my Mr. Wissel Saguaro cypress in the middle seat and I strap him in with the seatbelt because I didn't know where else to put it. I couldn't shove it underneath. And this guy looks at me and he looks at the tree and he looks at me and he looks at the tree and he goes, I've been traveling for 30 years. This is a first. And I was like, and then I had to explain to him like, oh, I've been wanting this plant. And he just shook his head and we didn't speak a word the rest of the time.
That was a missed opportunity. I mean, he said, I've seen a lot of things. You could have said, like, Mr. Whistles gets that a lot. As though you're one of those people who brings like a doll to dinner or something like that.
Right?
You think your plant is a real person. And
like an inanimate object. Now, listen, I will end by saying I planted this underneath a little bit too close underneath the eave of my house. And it was too late to recognize that. And I promptly ended up killing Mr. Wissel. And it is the plant I regret the most that I've ever killed because I truly loved it. It was in the perfect spot. I just pulled it out a bit further away from the foundation of the house. So it wasn't so it was getting rained on and it was getting decent moisture. But I killed Mr. Wissel. It was terrible. But Wissel Saguaro, Lawson cypress was a memory plant that I don't think I could ever top.
So the title of this episode we should change to The Day Danielle Killed Mr. Whistles. Danielle and the Death of Mr. Whistles.
Perfect British procedural.
Now, because everything sounds better in a British accent, here's Peter with his thoughts on memory plants.
I speak often about gardening being an act of hope, of planning for the future. Planting a bulb or a tree is to invest in the future. But, as Steve and Danielle have been saying, the plants in our gardens can tie us sometimes firmly to the past. A loved one who has passed can live on in a plant they cherished, or in one grown in their honour. It is good to tell these stories, and it is good to hear them. In sharing our memories, they become more real. The plants serve as monuments, or even as breadcrumbs to remind us the path our lives have taken. When plants hold our memories, they are also holding pieces of our lives, the love, the humour, and the humanity we want to keep forever.
With everything Peter just said, I'm glad he didn't remember to take one of his usual digs at me.
I was actually counting on that. Oh, bummer. All right, I guess I'll have to make do with what the expert has to say.
I'm Genevieve Schmidt, owner of a landscaping company in McKinleyville, California. As a landscape designer, part of my job for my clients is to catch those wisps of memory for a certain time, place, or plant, figure out how to integrate that into a landscape that does well in our rainy Northwest climate. For people who have transplanted themselves from the East Coast, lilacs and dogwoods get the most of those dreamy-eyed mentions, with memories of people sniffing their grandmother's lilacs or resting in the shade of a dogwood tree in bloom. Fall color is another element that people really miss when they move here, Everything is so green here all the time, people say. So the yellow fall color of birches, Japanese maples and their huge array of colors, Northwest native vine maples, red twig dogwoods, katsura trees, anything else that makes the fall feel like a totally distinct season has really helped people's gardens feel transportive. Then there are also those garden styles that bring people back to a special time in their lives, like a couple I worked with that courted in the wine country, and they wanted the lavenders, ornamental grasses, and all the brilliant color that they associated with their favorite wineries, and kind of brought them back to that special time in their lives. Another couple spent their early years together in Hawaii and wanted to recreate that lush bounty of foliage and have lots of fruits to eat out in the garden. And once again, bring them back to a time that really felt magical in their lives. In my own life, the plants that touch my spirit are the ones that are connected with special moments in my life, ones that remind me of a friend or a family member, or that marked a turning point in how I think about myself. I remember my first boss in landscaping 25 years ago liked to tease, in a friendly way of course, that I had gaudy taste in flowers. The moment she first told me that is etched in my mind. We were deadheading in a San Francisco front yard with a painted mural in rich tones of blue, and I couldn't stop commenting on the gorgeous golden yellow black-eyed Susan vine, Thunbergia alata, which had traveled up and over the mural and was climbing, mostly neatly, over the entry. The sweet tendrils reaching out, the lush leaves, and the brilliant flower color with the deep brown centers were ticking every box for me, especially against the cobalt blue tones of that mural. It was a perennial in San Francisco, but in Northern California where I live now, it's a fast-growing annual that sometimes comes back from the base and can be trained to cover a tall obelisk. There are elegant white and pink ones. I just saw a glorious pink one in the Annie's Annuals catalog this morning, and some rich red ones, but it's hard to beat the good cheer of the traditional orange and yellow shades. Later, with my old boss's friendly words ringing in my head, I spent years refining my taste and appreciating the simple, the woodland, the elegant. But that love of bodacious, out-there blooms continued. One landscape I worked in had a glorious Tilapia speciosissima. It's an Australian shrub, also called warata. It's in the Protea family, and it loves the damp, acidic soil in the northwest. It masqueraded as a simple evergreen shrub most of the year, then, in March, burst into brilliant reddish pincushion flowers. Even better, they can be used as cut flowers and brought inside. It's kind of a fussy plant to grow in the garden, burning with too much sun, faltering with not enough light, and like Daphne's, occasionally just up and dying for no apparent reason after looking fabulous for years. I spent ages trying to source one and finally took cuttings and had the surprising satisfaction of watching them actually grow. Sometimes it's the thrill of the chase that makes a plant extra special. Alströmerias are another plant that bring me joy. At a certain point in life, I just flat out re-embraced my love of splashy color, especially color I can cut and bring inside my house. When I first merged my love of writing with my love of plants, I was in the middle of this rediscovery of color, and I was all about the Alströmerias. The third harmonic Alströmeria seemed to me to be the ideal plant, that brilliant sunset orange color with burgundy flecks, dusky pinkish red buds, and that lush foliage. It looks tropical, but it's actually hardy to zone 7. After choosing it as the subject of my very first published article, coincidentally in Fine Gardening, it gave me a smile every time I passed by it in the garden. Alströmeria champagne is another Peruvian lily that brings back a fond memory. It was a surprise gift from a landscaping friend after I helped her with some business advice. "You will love this," she said. "It is going to be your new favorite." I wasn't so sure. It was lovely in its way, but if any plant could be described as beige, this was it. Definitely not in my usual color range. But I was glowing from her kindness, so I gave it a prime spot in my flower bed, and I figured it would be a fun challenge to figure out what went well with such a subdued color. Well, it turns out everything went well with it. Like a favorite pair of khaki pants, it seemed to look great with any color I paired it with. Better yet, when I accidentally picked a bouquet with too wild of color combos, adding some champagne Alströmeria immediately brought it together and just made it all work. In different lights, it either glows a creamy butter yellow or takes on a hint of soft pink. The The bright pink backs of the petals added some pop, while the yellow flash on the top petals and the burgundy streaks gave it enough complexity to stand on its own in a vase, with only a small bit of purple salvia or foliage to act as a filler. My friend was right. It became a fast favorite, and it was a great reminder for me to keep on trying new things because our tastes really can evolve over time.
I know Jen has actually written about that Alstroemeria third harmonic for the magazine before, and just hearing her talk about it and her memories behind that plant makes me want it now. And I'm typically not an Alstroemeria person. It wasn't a plant I was really into prior to just hearing her.
Well, let's hope it doesn't end up like Mr. Wissel's.